Here's something that almost nobody knows. On July 2nd, 1776, the American colonies voted for independence from Britain, and John Adams, one of the men who made it happen, wrote a letter to his wife that very night. He was practically bouncing off the walls. He told her that July 2nd would be celebrated forever, that future generations would light bonfires, set off fireworks, and throw parades every single year on July 2nd. So, why are you watching fireworks on the 4th? Most people assume the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, that a group of brave men gathered in a hot, sweaty room in Philadelphia, dramatically signed their names on a piece of paper, and boom, America was born. Happy birthday. Let's eat hot dogs. And honestly, that's kind of what the holiday feels like, right? We say on July 4th, 1776, the founders declared independence. It's in every textbook. It's on every flag cake at every barbecue. It's the whole thing. But the story of why we celebrate July 4th and not July 2nd or August 2nd or literally any other date is one of the most wonderfully chaotic accidents in American history. It involves a printing deadline, a man with the most famous signature ever written, and two founding fathers who both died on the exact same impossible day, 50 years apart. Let's weave it together. To understand why July 4th matters, you have to go back to July 1st, 1776. The colonies had been at war with Britain for over a year, but actually declaring independence, putting it in writing, making it official, was a massive, terrifying step. Because doing so meant every man who signed it was technically committing treason against the crown, and the punishment for treason against the British crown was death. So yeah, stakes were pretty high. A Virginia delegate named Richard Henry Lee had proposed independence a month earlier. Congress had been arguing about it ever since, because of course they had. These were politicians. Finally, on July 1st, they held a vote. It wasn't even close to unanimous. 9 colonies voted yes. Pennsylvania and South Carolina voted no. Delaware's 2 delegates were split right down the middle. New York abstained entirely and just stood there awkwardly. This was a mess. So they decided to try again the next morning, as you do. On July 2nd, 1776, 12 colonies voted yes. New York still didn't vote, classic New York, but 12 out of 13 was enough. The Continental Congress had officially voted for independence, and John Adams completely lost his mind with excitement. He wrote to his wife Abigail calling it the most memorable epocha in the history of America. He was absolutely certain future generations would celebrate July 2nd every year. He was right about the celebration. He was just wrong about the date. Here's what happened. At the same time the colonies were voting, they had also been working on a document written mostly by a 33-year-old from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson that would explain to the world exactly why they were breaking away. It wasn't enough to just say, "We're free now. Bye." They needed to make the case. Congress made 86 changes to Jefferson's draft. 86. They argued over every single word. They cut nearly a quarter of what he originally wrote, which reportedly made Jefferson absolutely miserable, in the way that only a writer who's had their work edited can be miserable. Benjamin Franklin, sitting right next to him, tried to cheer him up with a joke. It didn't really work. Finally, on July 4th, 1776, Congress approved the final text of the Declaration of Independence. Now here's the part that surprises everyone. They did not sign it that day. Most of the 56 signatures on the Declaration of Independence were added on August 2nd, 1776, nearly a month later. Some signatures came even after that. One delegate didn't sign until 1781, 5 years later. So what actually happened on July 4th? Congress sent the approved text to a printer named John Dunlap, who worked through the entire night of July 4th into July 5th. He printed roughly 200 copies, known today as the Dunlap broadsides, that were rushed by horseback to every corner of the colonies. No email, no social media, just a guy on a horse, riding very fast in the dark. General George Washington had it read aloud to his troops in New York on July 9th. That same night, a crowd tore down a gilded statue of King George III, melted it down, and turned it into over 42,000 musket balls, which is honestly one of the most iconic things that has ever happened. People heard the declaration in town squares, churches, and taverns across the colonies in the days that followed. They celebrated with bonfires and bells and cheers. Not on July 2nd. Not on August 2nd. They celebrated when they heard it, and most of them heard it right after July 4th, the date printed right at the top of every single copy. The date stuck. July 4th was on the document. July 4th was what people remembered, and July 4th is what 330 million people have celebrated every year since. Now, about that signature you've definitely seen before. John Hancock was president of the Continental Congress and the first to sign, at least ceremonially. He signed his name so dramatically large that, according to legend, he declared King George could read it without his glasses. Whether he actually said that is debated by historians, but the signature is very, very real, and it is very, very large. And it's why, to this day, when someone asks for your John Hancock, they mean your autograph. So here's why July 4th became America's birthday. Not because that's when independence was voted on, that was July 2nd. Not because that's when the Declaration was signed, that was mostly August 2nd. It's because July 4th is the date on the document that was rushed to every corner of the new nation, read aloud to cheering crowds, and burned into the memory of an entire generation. History isn't always tidy. Sometimes a printing deadline decides what 330 million people celebrate 2.5 centuries later. And now, the wonder fact. The one that sounds so made up that you'll want to immediately text it to someone. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, two of the most important founders, two men who helped build this country together, then argued bitterly for decades, then slowly became friends again in old age. Both died on July 4th, 1826. The exact same day. 50 years to the day after independence was declared. Adams' reported last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." He didn't know that Jefferson had died just a few hours earlier, hundreds of miles away in Virginia. And in 2026, right now, America turns 250. A quarter millennium since that sweltering summer in Philadelphia, when a group of people decided to try something the world had never quite seen before. They weren't sure it would work. They signed anyway. Happy 250th birthday, America. From Wonder Weave and from Cappy.